While I was working a double shift, my fiancée texted, "Don't be mad. I'll go to dinner with my ex." I replied, "Perfect. I'll send this to your dad before he pays for the wedding." Her response, "And what happened next?" I had been on my feet since 6 in the morning, and by the time the restaurant manager called for one more batch of late-night orders, I already felt the day dragging across my shoulders like wet sand. The hotel kitchen always had that mix of chaos and rhythm that only made sense to people who worked there long enough. I knew every sound of the place, every step of the cooks, every habit of the servers who rushed through with impatient trays. That double shift had been assigned because 2 line cooks called out at the last minute, and I had covered for them without thinking twice. I wiped my forehead, checked the ticket line again, and tried to keep my nerves steady until the end of the shift. I remember reaching for a pan at the exact moment my phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it for a moment because I still heard the sous chef shouting about an overcooked steak, but when the phone vibrated a second time, I stepped aside from the stove to look at it. The notification displayed a message from Karina, my fiancée, which was strange because she usually never texted when she knew I was working a double. The message said she did not want me to be upset, but she intended to have dinner with her ex that night. She added that it would be harmless. I stood there for a moment, letting the heat from the stoves rise around me while my thoughts scrambled for a logical explanation. I could not find one. She and I were 8 months into our engagement, and her ex had faded out of conversation long ago, which made the message land with the force of a bottle across the back of the head. My first reaction was disbelief. My second was clarity. I typed a response telling her that her father, who had already prepared a large deposit for the wedding venue, would receive the message as well. There was no anger in my tone. I simply wanted her to understand that I would not stand quietly in the corner while she eased herself into some half-secret emotional reunion with someone she once dated. I hit send and slid the phone back into my pocket. I finished plating orders while the kitchen noise roared around me, but my mind had left the room entirely. Within minutes, my phone began ringing. First once, then again, then multiple texts stacking one over another. Her messages insisted that she did not mean it that way, that it was miscommunication, that she only wanted closure. The word closure felt insulting, considering the wedding invitations had been drafted and placed in a drawer at her parents' house. I ignored the calls and put in the last round of orders before telling the chef I needed to leave early due to a personal emergency. He did not ask questions because the look on my face must have explained plenty. Outside, the night air felt sharp enough to wake the dead. I drove toward her parents' house because I knew she would run there first. They lived 20 minutes from the hotel, in a quiet neighborhood where most of the houses had trimmed hedges and identical front porches. Her father had always treated me with respect, while her mother often kept her reactions muted, as if she viewed every event through a filter of caution. I pulled into their driveway and noticed another car parked there that belonged to her younger brother, Dylan, who usually spent evenings gaming with friends. When I stepped out of the car, the porch light flicked on. Karina had not arrived yet, which surprised me. I expected her to appear in a storm of explanations. Instead, her father opened the door, wearing a look that blended concern and confusion. He asked what brought me there so suddenly. I told him to read the message I had forwarded. He checked his phone, and the expression on his face tightened with disappointment. He stepped aside and allowed me into the living room, where he asked for clarification. While he listened to what had happened, I noticed his son, Dylan, watching us from the staircase. He had always been a quiet kid who observed more than he spoke. When his father stepped into the kitchen to call his wife, the boy approached me with a cautious step. He told me that Karina had been leaving the house earlier than usual over the past 2 weeks, and that she often changed outfits at the last minute, which he found strange. He said he had overheard one of her phone conversations in which she mentioned meeting someone who helped her figure things out. He claimed the name did not sound like her ex. This information hit with enough force to make my thoughts scatter again. Her father returned and asked whether Karina might be under stress. I did not see panic in his eyes, only a deep disappointment that suggested he already suspected she had been unstable with her decisions. He called her phone, but she did not answer. He stepped outside to try calling again, leaving me alone with the realization that I had no idea what I would discover next. I decided to leave before Karina returned. I did not want a screaming match on her parents' porch. I wanted answers without theatrics. I drove away as slowly as possible, hoping she would call with an honest explanation, but my phone remained silent. Instead, I received a message from one of my coworkers who lived near the restaurant district. He told me he had just seen Karina's car parked outside a small place called Terrace Bistro. That name struck me because it was not the kind of place she would choose for something innocent. It was known for dim lighting, intimate table settings, and a reputation for private conversations. I reached the restaurant in 10 minutes. I saw her car parked beneath a flickering street lamp and felt something tighten in my chest. I could not enter through the front door without preparing myself, so I waited outside for a moment while people walked in and out with relaxed expressions, unaware of the storm that had formed inside my mind. I finally stepped inside, scanning the tables until I saw her at the far corner. She had not noticed me yet. The shock came from the person sitting with her. It was not her ex. It was a coworker named Sean, someone she had mentioned twice in passing without giving any indication they ever met outside work. He leaned slightly toward her, and she held a posture that suggested familiarity far beyond casual conversation. That moment ended any hope I had carried with me. The shift at the hotel had drained my body, but the sight before me drained something deeper. I waited for a chance to approach them without causing a scene. As I moved closer, another woman walked in through the door behind me, and I recognized her face from a picture Karina once showed me. She was Sean's girlfriend. What happened next would launch the chaos of the entire story. The moment Sean's girlfriend stepped inside, the atmosphere of the restaurant shifted in ways the diners did not yet notice. She carried herself with a focused kind of quiet, the kind that precedes a storm. She walked with purpose, scanning the tables, and her eyes narrowed when she spotted the corner booth. I stayed still, halfway between the entrance and their table, watching everything unfold without interrupting the pattern that now had its own gravity. She marched toward them with steady steps, not rushing yet not hesitating. Karina saw her before she reached the table, and her face drained in a single second. Sean turned and looked equally startled. Neither of them had expected her to appear. The girlfriend stopped at the table and said something sharp in a voice low enough that the rest of the restaurant could not hear, but her expression told the story clearly. She pointed at Karina, then pointed at Sean, then confronted him with a controlled fury. Chairs shifted around them as nearby diners began paying attention. Karina kept glancing around as if searching for a safe exit. Instead, she saw me standing near the wall. Her face shifted again, this time into a mixture of panic and disbelief. She froze so visibly that even the servers paused mid-step. I held her gaze for a second without moving. I wanted her to understand that I had not arrived by accident, and there would be no comfortable explanation waiting for her at the end of this. The girlfriend reached into her bag and pulled out printed screenshots that she tossed on the table. I recognized the layout instantly. They were screenshots of messages between Sean and Karina. She had printed them, probably earlier that day, after suspecting something. She forced the pages toward Sean, demanding an answer. The people at the nearest tables watched openly now. Sean insisted on something defensive, but she only grew louder. She accused them of meeting for weeks, and the restaurant's quiet tone turned into scattered whispers. Karina attempted to stand, but her knee hit the underside of the table, making the plates rattle loud enough to startle people nearby. She tried to explain herself to the girlfriend, but her words stumbled into incoherence. The girlfriend pointed at me suddenly, drawing the attention of the entire corner of the restaurant. She announced that I should hear the truth, as well, since I appeared to be the last one to know what had been happening behind my back. I approached the table calmly. No one else in the restaurant moved. The entire room focused on the four of us, as if the night had turned into a performance staged for strangers. I asked Karina what exactly this dinner was supposed to be. She started talking quickly, stringing half-made excuses together that contradicted things she had said earlier that week. She insisted it was a mistake, that she came only to help Sean with a problem at work, that it was not what it looked like. She reached for my hand, but I stepped back before her fingers touched mine. Sean attempted to explain as well, but his girlfriend cut him off. She told him she had evidence he had been lying not only to her, but also to his supervisor, who believed he had been working overtime during evenings he had actually spent with Karina. She claimed she had already emailed the evidence to his workplace because she refused to protect anyone who had treated her like a fool. Sean's posture collapsed into defeated silence. Karina's panic intensified as she realized the consequences were no longer limited to our relationship. I looked at the printed screenshots on the table. One page showed a transfer of money from Karina's account to Sean's. Another showed a message thread where she asked if he had received the envelope she left in his mailbox. None of these matched the text she sent earlier claiming she wanted to have dinner with her ex. The contradiction sat in the middle of the table like a stone. I asked her where the money had gone. She opened her mouth, but did not speak. The girlfriend answered instead. She said Sean had been late on his rent for 3 months, and that someone had been covering the missing balance. She assumed it was Karina. The shock of that revelation hit harder than I expected. The idea that she had been secretly funneling money to a man she barely knew made no sense unless she had been hiding far more. The restaurant manager approached the table and asked all 4 of us to step outside because customers were beginning to complain. No one argued, and we walked out into the cold evening air while strangers pressed themselves against the windows to watch. The girlfriend moved toward the parking lot, telling Sean she would no longer speak to him because she deserved someone who valued her. She got in her car and drove away without waiting for a response. That left me standing in front of Karina and Sean. Karina reached for me again, insisting that she had been trying to help a friend. She said she could explain everything if I would get in the car with her. I asked her if she had been helping Sean every night she left home early for the past 2 weeks. She flinched and stepped back, which answered the question without words. Sean attempted to defend her by saying she had only been a supportive person during a difficult time in his life. The phrase sounded rehearsed and hollow. Karina interrupted him repeatedly, trying to construct a narrative that would place responsibility on confusion, stress, and misunderstanding. I stood there listening to both of them scrambling for explanations that never aligned. I told her I needed honesty, not damage control. She insisted she had not betrayed the relationship. I asked why she had lied about meeting her ex. She said she panicked and thought the excuse would sound more harmless than the truth, which made no sense because meeting an ex for dinner was hardly a harmless choice. Her story crumbled with every attempt to repair it. A group of servers stepped outside for their break and recognized Karina from previous visits. They watched with interest as the scene unfolded, and the weight of their attention pushed her into a new level of embarrassment. She attempted to leave, but I asked her one final question before she walked away. I wanted to know whether there had been anything else I should have known about. She responded with a defensive shake of her head. I drove home after the confrontation with a sense of growing clarity. I did not want to shout or create chaos. I wanted the truth to settle into place piece by piece. When I got home, I found something that changed the trajectory of everything that came afterward. I noticed a thin envelope on the kitchen counter with the corner of a bank statement sticking out. I opened it and scanned the transactions. There were 4 separate withdrawals from our joint savings account over the past month. Each withdrawal matched the approximate rent amount for an apartment in Sean's complex. I checked the addresses listed on the payments, and the confirmation hit with immediate force. She had not been helping a friend in distress. She had been helping him live. The discovery created a shift inside me that did not fade. I sat at the kitchen table, letting everything settle into place. Nothing about the situation fit the story she had tried to present. Nothing aligned with the image she had maintained throughout our engagement. Every missing puzzle piece now appeared, and the picture they formed was something I had never imagined when she first texted me at work. I realized that the next steps would not be gentle. They would change everything. I sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, staring at the bank statement as if the numbers might rearrange themselves into something reasonable. For withdrawals. For different dates. Each tied to the same apartment complex where Sean lived. The evidence sat in my hands without hesitation or ambiguity. It contradicted every explanation she had given me outside that restaurant. I let the information settle, kept my thoughts steady, and prepared myself for a conversation that could not be softened. Karina's car pulled into the driveway shortly after 1 a.m. The headlights brushed across the walls as she parked, and I could hear the uneven rhythm of her steps approaching the front door. She walked in with her hair slightly disheveled, her eyes red around the edges, and her breath uneven. She expected to continue the conversation from earlier, but the moment she saw the bank papers on the table, her posture stiffened. She asked why I had gone through the mail. I reminded her it was our shared account, and nothing about the papers suggested privacy. She tried to sit beside me, but I gestured for her to sit across. That small distance made her uneasy. She kept glancing at the papers as if they might burst into flames. I asked her directly about the withdrawals. She claimed she had lent Sean money for temporary rent help because he was on the verge of eviction. She said she had not told me because she feared I would think poorly of her generosity. The explanation felt polished and too ready, like something she had rehearsed on her drive home. I asked why she used our joint savings instead of her own account. She avoided eye contact and insisted she had paid for other expenses recently, which made her account temporarily low. The excuses formed a chain, but every link looked brittle. Before she could continue, my phone vibrated. I recognized the number from earlier in the evening. It was Sean's girlfriend. I answered the call while Karina watched with wide eyes. The girlfriend told me she wanted to explain everything without noise or chaos. She had spent the last few hours gathering details after leaving the restaurant. She had spoken to Sean's landlord, who confirmed that the rent had been paid by a woman not listed on the lease. The landlord provided receipts, which she photographed and sent to me immediately. The name on the payments matched Karina's exact signature. She told me she did not know the extent of the situation until that evening and wanted me to have the truth because she believed she had been misled just as badly. When I ended the call, Karina's face carried a stiff kind of fear. She asked what the girlfriend wanted. I told her it was not important. What mattered were the receipts she had shared. I placed my phone on the table and tilted the screen toward Karina. The images displayed her signature beside each payment. She squeezed her hands together, searching for something to say. She insisted she had only stepped in because Sean had been struggling after losing hours at work. She said she had tried to help him quietly so it would not become gossip. She repeated the same line about generosity, but the volume of her voice kept rising as if she believed repetition could turn a lie into truth. I reminded her that she had told me earlier she had dinner planned with her ex. She tried to pivot by saying she panicked. She claimed she expected I would disapprove of her helping a coworker who once admired her. She rambled about misunderstandings, stress, and the pressure of wedding planning. The contradictions in her explanations multiplied with each sentence she formed. I asked her why she needed to meet him privately at a place like Terrace Bistro, and she responded by insisting it was the only quiet location he felt comfortable discussing his situation. The answer sounded flimsy even as she said it. She leaned forward, pleading for patience, and insisted she could explain if I would stop assuming the worst. Her hands trembled, and her voice took on a desperate tone I had never heard from her before. I let her speak until she ran out of justifications. Then I asked the question that truly mattered. I wanted to know whether she had ever stayed overnight at Sean's apartment. Her expression shifted in a way that removed any need for a verbal answer. She tried to deny it, but the denial came too late to matter. I told her that Sean's girlfriend had provided timestamps of nights she had seen Karina's car parked near the apartment around 1 or 2 in the morning. Karina's face twisted into panic when she realized the girlfriend had been tracking her movements out of suspicion. When she understood that the situation had grown beyond her control, she broke. She admitted, after several halting sentences, that she had visited Sean's apartment during weeks when she felt uncertain about the engagement. She said she had been confused about her feelings and that Sean had listened to her without judgment. She claimed she had not intended for anything romantic to happen, but the phrasing suggested far more than she wanted to acknowledge. She admitted she had wanted attention from someone who was not obligated to love her. She said she had wanted to see how it felt to be noticed again before committing to a permanent future. The confession landed with a weight that silenced the room. She covered her face with her hands, trying to contain her emotions, but the details she revealed only solidified the reality I had already accepted. She told me she had reached out to her ex only because she wanted reassurance that she was making the right decision marrying me. She admitted she had been hoping he would respond in ways that made her feel validated. When he did not, she relied on Sean instead. Her father knocked on the door before either of us could continue. He entered the house with a stern expression and held his phone up as he walked into the kitchen. He said he had received my forwarded message and tried calling her repeatedly. He had been worried something was seriously wrong. When he saw the documents on the table, his face darkened. He asked her directly what she had been doing with Sean and why she had lied. She tried to defend herself, but her father told her to stop talking for a moment. The tension in the kitchen felt dense enough to reshape the air. He studied the bank receipts, then looked at me with an expression that suggested he already understood the truth. He asked Karina whether she wanted to continue lying or finally explain herself. That was the moment she said something that silenced both of us. She admitted that she had been using her involvement with Sean as a way to provoke her ex into noticing her again. She claimed she had wanted to see whether he might ask for another chance. She confessed she had expected him to reach out once he heard rumors. She believed she deserved to see whether she was choosing the right man before finalizing the wedding. Her father reacted with disbelief. He stepped back and stared at her as if he did not recognize her. The disappointment in his expression deepened until he could no longer hide it. He asked her whether she understood the cruelty of what she had done. She insisted she had been overwhelmed, but her explanation fell apart as quickly as the rest. He told her the wedding funds would no longer be available until she proved she had made a clear and stable decision. He said he would not finance a ceremony built on confusion and manipulation. Karina tried to plead with him, but he walked out before she could finish. The house fell silent after he left. Karina sat at the table, shaking and overwhelmed, while I realized the only path left was the one that led away from her. I told her the engagement was no longer intact, and nothing she said afterward changed that. Karina sat at the table with her hands pressed against her forehead, trying to catch her breath while the last pieces of the truth settled between us. The house felt silent in an unfamiliar way. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the soft settling of the walls as the temperature shifted, and her unsteady breathing filling the space. I knew there was nothing left to question and nothing left to repair. The engagement had collapsed under the weight of her choices long before I arrived home that night. All I had done was flip the light switch and look directly at what was already there. She asked if I could sit with her and listen to one final explanation, but I remained where I stood. She talked in circles, insisting the situation had spiraled beyond her control. She said she never intended to betray me and only wanted reassurance that she had chosen the right person to marry. She insisted she had wanted closure with her ex and support from Sean at the same time. She tried to frame it as emotional confusion, but everything she described sounded calculated rather than spontaneous. I told her I needed space and stepped outside. The cool night air carried a calmness that contrasted sharply with the chaos inside the house. I walked to my car and leaned against the door, letting the reality settle without forcing myself to rush through it. I finally understood that no explanation she attempted would make her choices less deliberate. The truth had already formed its shape, and no amount of pleading would reshape it. She came outside after a few minutes, still shaking, and asked whether this meant the wedding was officially over. I told her clearly that we were no longer engaged. She grabbed my arm, trying to prevent me from getting into the car. I pulled my arm free and told her I would return the ring to her family the next day. She covered her face, sank onto the porch step, and asked what she was supposed to do now. I did not answer. I got into the car and drove away without looking back. I stayed with my coworker, Hilbert, who lived 30 minutes away from the restaurant. He handed me a blanket and pointed to the couch without asking for details. I appreciated the lack of questions. The noise of the day had been enough. I slept lightly, waking up several times with the flashes of the confrontation still playing through my head. When morning came, I drove back to her parents' neighborhood. Her father opened the door with the tense calm of a man who had not slept. He invited me inside and asked whether I needed help retrieving my belongings from their home. I thanked him and said I could manage. He told me he had spoken to Karina after I left. She had admitted everything to him, not only about the visits to Sean's apartment, but also about her hope that her ex might return to her. Her father sat in the living room, rubbing his forehead as he spoke, and admitted he had no idea she had been living such a double life. He said he felt responsible because he had allowed her to rely on him financially for too long, which had made her avoid owning her decisions. I returned the engagement ring to him because I believed it belonged with her family rather than in her hands. He took it with a deep breath and said he would keep it until she was in a place where she could handle seeing it without spiraling into another crisis. I told him I needed to collect my belongings from the house I shared with her. He insisted on accompanying me so the process would remain calm. Karina was not home when we arrived. The quiet of the place felt unnerving. Her father stayed by the doorway while I packed my clothes, work gear, and personal items. I found another envelope on the bedside table, this time addressed to her from Sean. Inside was a note expressing gratitude for supporting him and saying he believed he owed her more than he could repay. The handwriting confirmed everything she had tried and failed to deny. I placed the note back on the table and continued packing without commenting on it. By the time we finished, her father looked exhausted. He walked me to the driveway and apologized repeatedly, even though none of it had been his doing. I told him he did not owe me anything and thanked him for handling the situation with respect. I left the house for the last time, relieved to close the chapter. 2 days later, the fallout spread wider. Sean's girlfriend contacted me again. She told me she had sent the screenshots and printed messages to Sean's supervisor as she promised. His workplace reviewed everything and discovered he had falsified hours and submitted fraudulent overtime claims. The company placed him on immediate leave pending termination. She also revealed that the landlord had found out Karina had been staying overnight without being on the lease. The landlord issued a warning and threatened eviction if it continued. Sean confronted Karina, and the argument between them escalated to the point where the complex security had to intervene. Karina's job also took a hit. She worked at a real estate office where reputation mattered. Her supervisor had been at Terrace Bistro the night everything unfolded. Word spread quickly among the staff. Clients heard fragments of what happened and asked questions. Within a week, her office manager informed her that her position was being reevaluated due to concerns about professionalism. She attempted to defend herself, but the damage was already done. People avoided working with her because they felt uneasy trusting someone whose personal life had erupted so publicly. Karina texted me several times after the fallout began. She wanted to explain again and insisted she had not realized she would lose everything so quickly. She claimed she had been overwhelmed by responsibilities and believed she could manage everything quietly until she sorted out her feelings. She insisted she had not wanted the engagement to end and asked whether we could meet for closure. I did not respond. I had spent months building a stable life with her, and she had dismantled it with decisions that contradicted every promise she had made. I moved into a small apartment closer to the hotel. The space felt empty at first, but the quiet allowed me to rebuild my routine without constant turbulence. I focused on work, took extra shifts, and gradually stabilized my finances again. My coworkers knew something had happened but chose not to probe, which I appreciated. I formed new patterns, filled my weekends with long walks around the city, and let time reshape the edges of the experience. Her father called once, months later, to tell me Karina had moved back into their house temporarily. She was working part-time at a local retail store after losing her position at the real estate office. He told me he regretted the way things had unfolded, but felt she needed to face consequences in order to grow. He wished me well, and I wished the same for him. The conversation ended on a quiet note, and we never spoke again. Karina tried reaching out a few more times through different numbers, but I chose not to respond. Everything she needed to know had already been said. Every answer she sought belonged to the version of her life she tried to juggle until it collapsed. I moved forward. The double-shift text that started everything felt distant now, as if it belonged to a life I had already outgrown. I did not chase closure. I simply lived differently.